I kind of wish that we could do this in person, but I guess many of you live far away, so it wouldn't have been possible anyway, so we may as well do it this way. So I'll begin by chanting a few mantras, and then we'll just jump in. Om Jnanatimurandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Mano Bhishtam Stapitang Yena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Jataparakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagapate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Okay, welcome everybody. We put the word out to do this. It's something that I've been meaning to do for a while, and then when Raghunath cut out on us all for 5 days or so, I figured now was a good time to do it, just to fill in a little bit. But I've been there's what I want to teach is based off of two courses that many of you have taken before. I'm sure many of you haven't, that I've taught. One is called the Four Paths of Yoga, and the other is called the Purity of Our Spiritual Intention. And it's been a while since I've, because this past year has been, usually I'm teaching them all the time in different kind of teacher trainings and things, but it's been a bit of a while since I've taught them because of COVID. And I think I'm just in a little bit different place, so they're probably going to come out a little bit different this time as well. And I wanted to get it down and recorded because there's some talk of creating a book out of it, and we know some people that are good editors, so we're thinking that with the recordings we could hopefully make it a lot easier than me writing the whole thing, which I've tried and failed at before. So there's, as I advertised it, I mapped it out, and it would be in 4 classes. I have a feeling it's going to take more than that, and I'm just going to work through it. We'll do a couple this weekend, and I'm sure I won't finish it this weekend, so we'll probably do at least a couple more next weekend, and it might even take like 8 classes or something like that. I'm not sure. But I'm happy to do it, and we'll keep you up to date with the dates that we'll be speaking on as they come. I want to do this as just like a donation basis thing, so people can give whatever they like. People that are Patreon members, particularly if they're generous Patreon members, please don't at all feel obligated to give. But if you'd like to give something, that's great. And the way that people can give, if they would like to give, is they can do through PayPal, and the address for that is bhakticollective@gmail.com. And Mara's going to share that up on the chat board. So again, it's whatever you'd like to give is fine. And there's always a few things I like to share before I speak. One is I like to keep this relatively informal, so that it's a little bit more difficult through Zoom than it is in person. But I like to take questions. This is kind of a large group, 72 people, so we'll do our best with the questions and see how it works. But please don't feel shy to ask questions. And we can do it 2 ways. We can write them up in the chat board, And we could also take them live. People can share that hand raising thing, whatever that's called. And Mara will do her best to kind of work through them. And if for some reason we can't get to your question, if you can write it on the chat board or hold on to it, we can try to answer that question either the next class or maybe even do it on our question and answer sessions, on Saturdays that Raghunath and I do. Let's see. But if you have a question, don't be afraid to ask it in one format or another. We'll try to get to it. I'd like to also mention that I don't see my role here as like a preacher. In other words, I don't see my role necessarily to convince you of anything. I see my role more as to present the philosophy of Bhakti Yoga authentically. And then you can do with it as you like. But that being said, I'm sure that there will be times when I'm speaking where I'm almost assuming that you agree with what I'm saying. Like I might speak of reincarnation as a matter of fact or something like that. And if I do, and when I do speak like that, please understand. Please don't take it as if as if that's some kind of pressure or something like that. But I'm just, again, I'll try to play the role of a representative of this tradition, and then you can take from that tradition and use it as you feel best. Anything else that I should mention, Mary? You got anything in mind?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Good.
Okay. And if there's something else I want to mention, but I think I want to share kind of like an introduction going into this, and I think I'll get to this point in the introduction. But the basic point is that I'm going to speak a lot about yoga. Let me just speak a little bit more as we get started here. What we'll cover, and I would imagine all of you must have seen this, although maybe not all of you do, because some of you just may have heard about it on the podcast. But there's basically 4 subjects that we're going to be covering. The first one has to do with understanding our own illusion, or how we're trapped. How the soul is trapped in the material world, and trapped within a body, and trapped engaging with the world through the mind, through the mind and through the senses of the body. The nature of that trap, how it works, really try to understand that well. If we can get a real clear understanding of that, we're well on our way to understanding yoga. And then that's one class, the nature of the illusion. The second class is the paths out of the illusion. And those paths are the 4 paths of yoga. And when you take the entire yoga tradition, it's a very vast tradition. It's very broad. There's so many ancient texts on yoga. There's so many ancient teachers of yoga, commentators on those texts that have shared their insights on them. There are modern texts on yoga that you can go and buy in Barnes & Noble, and there's modern yoga teachers. And it may seem like they're coming from different angles. They have very different presentations. It can be very hard to get your arms around the whole thing and make sense of it. There's all the talk about gods and demigods and other universes, and then some people are just more to presenting asanas. There's the chakras, and there's all these things. How do you make sense of the whole thing? I'm going to try to kind of map out a path right through it, and a path that can hopefully be clear and logical, authentic, authorized, and maybe more important than anything, effective, like transformative. That if you can boil it down to understand what's most essential for me to transform, well, now we go somewhere else with yoga. And that's the point that I want to make, is that I feel strongly that right now we have, like, how many people here? We got like 76 people, and some of you are more than one. So we got, 80 something people or something like that. And I honestly believe, really right down to the core of my heart, I believe that every one of us has the potential to become a true sage, a true yogi, and completely transform in this lifetime, and really achieve the highest goals of yoga in this life. I don't believe that it's something that's just out of our reach, that's only for like rare souls that are wandering in the mountains in the Himalayas and so on. I think it's something that we can all do. And so as we approach yoga, we may feel, we may approach it on many different levels. It may just be a physical thing for us. It may be, it may provide like a social scene for us in friendships. It may be part of a physical therapy that we have. It may be something that we do to find some peace of mind. And all of those are fine, and very good. But traditionally, yoga was something that could really deliver the highest benefits in life. And my point is that I don't think any of us should feel that we don't have the potential to achieve that. And so hopefully what I'm going to present today will give a vision of how that might actually be, not just today, but in the following days. Give us a vision of how I can take this vast body of information, make clear sense of it, apply it in my life, and actually feel the effect of it and transform. That's what I'm aiming at. And so I hope I can play a small role in that, and that we can all kind of move forward together. Okay. So all that being said, let me just kind of put all of this in a context, and that is that look at us and look at our lives, particularly the lives of us modern day people living in the Western world. We're out of touch with nature. I live in a city where you can't see the stars at night because of the profusion of artificial light. That's a very weird thing. That's a very strange. You should be able to see the stars when you look up at night. And, the rivers, I live on an island, and there's a river on each side of me. And on the banks of those rivers are big, wide highways that are constantly full of rushing automobile traffic. Nobody bathes in those rivers, right? The natural thing for a human being is that you every morning, if you live by a river, you go to that river and you walk down in the bathing ghat. In India, they have the ghats. It's like the steps that are built down into the river, and you bathe in that river, and it's sure we need to clean ourselves, and bathe, but it also does something more for someone to be in touch with nature, to see the stars, to be aware of the waxing and the waning of the moon, to bathe in the river and feel the physical healing, of the river for the mind and for the digestive system and for the body. I live in a place where like the sunrises and the sunsets are mostly hidden, behind tall structures of concrete and glass and steel. And maybe not everybody lives like in Manhattan like I do, but still, for the most part, we live lives like, even if I live out, I'm driving around in this car all the time, and I'm working in some office that's like some cubicle, there's some artificial kind of circumstance, and we lose touch. We don't reach our fingers down into the earth, and plant a seed and wonder about all the miracles of life that surround us. And it's not just that it's beautiful, and it's not even just that it has the power to nourish us and sustain us, nature, but by observing nature and by being in touch with nature, on a daily basis, we realize that it's rich with clues about understanding the very purpose of our existence, right? And the sages of ancient India, they were in touch with that nature, right? We've become out of touch with that nature. We're not only out of touch with nature, but we're largely out of touch with each other as well. Our technology, which is designed to make our life more fun or exciting or convenient, commonly serves to alienate us from one another, from nature as well, and from one another, from meaningful contact with each other. And in past cultures, particularly like in the yoga culture, which we all have an interest in, it was a daily affair to sit at the feet of a respected elder and hear the wisdom that they've distilled from their study and from their experience of life. That's real life. That's how we're meant to live. And today we struggle to find time to engage, like even in the most simple activities that people have always done to bond with each other and to enrich each other's lives. Simple things like cooking a meal together and sitting down quietly to eat and share a few thoughts about what we've learned that day. You know, it's not uncommon for people not to even have that experience as a regular part of their life. But that's human life is meant to be lived that way. And so when we're so out of, I think for most of us, we don't even slow down to recognize this. And people that are more thoughtful, they recognize it, but they're still running and running and running. But that disconnection from nature and that disconnection from like wise, peers and elders, these are the sources that are meant to help us develop wisdom, to contemplate wisdom and develop wisdom and to live a life of wisdom. And we're at a disadvantage because of the nature of the world that we live in. We're disconnected from a lot of that. And the result of that, naturally, is that we live in a world of distraction, and we seek happiness or escape by always looking outward, staring at screens with images that are constantly shifting. And we neglect to look inward toward the steady source of happiness that exists deep within the heart of every living being, deep within ourselves, right? Now that happiness, that satisfaction, connecting to it is what the sages of the yoga tradition called Atma Supersiddhiti, or the complete satisfaction of the self. That's the aim of yoga, to achieve that goal, And so the speakers of these ancient texts, and the people that have lived through them over the ages, they preserved super valuable teachings, the teachings of yoga, the teachings of bhakti. They've handed them down over the ages, and we have access to them today. All right. These sages, they were in touch with nature. They many of them were forest dwellers, and they cultivated and they deepened their wisdom through examining all the patterns in nature and the patterns in the growth of plants and the changing seasons. And they found lessons in the ways of observing the animals, and they felt a personal connection, like not just but like a personal connection with the sun, with the moon, with the stars, with the rivers, with the oceans, with the mountains, with fire, with all of these. And they were in touch with each other. That they had a like a long-standing tradition where they wouldn't be distracted by the kind of things that we're distracted by, and they wouldn't waste time, and they wouldn't waste words. They would inquire from one another about their progress in life and how they're doing on their path. And with juniors respecting the seniors, and seniors respecting, and very affectionate to the followers, they would find joy and they would find meaning in sharing their thoughts and sharing their stories. And that's what we want to tap into by going into this ancient literature. That's what Raghunath and I are trying to just, be a little link in that chain by sharing literally the wisdom of the sages. Right? And that's what the yoga tradition is. It's a tradition of wisdom. Now, what is a sage? Right? A sage is, defined as someone who's like profoundly wise, someone who's distinguished for their judgment and for their insight, and someone that has the ability to penetrate into a subtle topic and extract the essence of that topic and be personally transformed by that essence, and then present that essence in a straightforward and lucid way, appropriate for the changing times and the changing circumstances that people are living in. That is the work of the sage. And the insights that these great sages, the yoga tradition had, it doesn't come cheaply. It's earned partially by the kind of self-control which leads to purity of mind. And the sages understood a pure mind to be one free from what they referred to as the 6 enemies of truth and happiness. And those are lust, anger, greed, delusion, pride, and envy. Right? And envy even here means like hostility. Right? So for them, the practice of yoga was a way of purifying the mind of its internal enemies, opening it up to new and broader perspectives, and gradually uncovering one's own true nature that lies dormant within. Covered for so many years by so many layers of conditioning, built up over lifetimes. Yoga was going to dig down into that, help us cut through all that, find our true nature underneath it all. And so we can gain from their teachings, and we can apply their teachings, and we can be transformed by those teachings. And again, I believe that every one of us has that potential, and that if we want it, we can each make a strategy in life, how in this short lifetime that we have, that we're going to come to the stage of wisdom, that we can elevate ourselves to being, even in the crazy world that we live in, that we can be a sage, that we can have an even and peaceful mind through all of life's ups and downs, and that we can learn tolerance, and we can learn kindness, and we can learn to be satisfied very simply. And we can become capable of understanding the meaning of our life's journey, all the events that happen to us, all the ups and downs. We can draw lessons from all of them. And we can feel a connection to God within our own heart. And then we can begin to see God in everything and everyone. With a purified mind and a revived heart, we could feel, a clear purpose in life at all times, and become instruments of positive change in society. This state of consciousness is, I see, and the sages of ancient India spoke of as the goal of human life and the very goal of yoga. So let us have that that confidence, or I guess optimism, that we can be changed, that we can be drastically changed. And I say this because I believe I know so many people that have been transformed in this way. So I wanted to, I guess that was a long-winded way of sharing what I want to say is that let's not sell ourselves short. Let's be open to the idea that I could really understand and live the life of a yogi, even in this life. Okay. So now this is kind of the starting point of the talk, and we're going to discuss yoga now, right? And again, like in the first part, I want to define what yoga is, and talk about the illusion and how the type of entrapment, you could say, that the soul experiences trapped within the body and the mind. And not only the body and the mind, but moving through the material world. That's what we want to discuss. We may finish that today, or we may finish that tomorrow. I'm not sure. And then the second, or maybe third class, depending on when we finish, the next section, the next major lesson, will be the 4 paths of yoga. Okay, and these 4 paths are Ashtanga yoga, sometimes called Raja yoga, Jnana yoga, spelled Jnana, Jnana yoga, which literally the word Jnana means knowledge, and we'll get into that in detail. Karma yoga and Bhakti yoga. So Ashtanga yoga, Jnana yoga, Karma yoga, and Bhakti yoga. These are the 4 paths out of illusion. And when I say that I believe that we all have the potential to achieve the goal of yoga, when we talk about those 4 paths, what I'm going to do is I want to show you the unity of those paths, what makes them all yoga, what they share in common, which is so much. But I also want to show the distinction between each one of these paths, and show why I and many of the great teachers, I following in the footsteps of many of the great teachers in the yoga tradition, believe that certain paths will be practical and effective for us, and certain paths, due to our conditioning and due to our circumstances, may be a bit out of our range, so that we might learn from them, we might even apply some of their teachings, but to follow the path from beginning to the goal would be a long shot for most of us. And so, therefore, let's focus on those paths that can really be transformative to us. So anyway, I'm getting maybe a little bit more detailed than I need to at this point. But first, we need to talk, if we're going to talk about yoga and we're going to talk about those 4 paths of yoga, we need to discuss first, what is yoga? We need to define yoga. And before I do that, I want to tell a story. And it's a story many of you have heard before, but I don't know if it's a story, it's more of an analogy, but it's such an important one. This analogy is so right on, is so helpful in conceiving really what life is all about, what to speak of what yoga is all about. And that is the analogy of the musk deer. And if you take this in, if you really hear this, this can transform your life. It can become like, I don't know, a kind of something that one can always remember to use as kind of a guiding light in life. And not only that, but if you ever need to really explain what yoga is to someone, like, and like someone who doesn't know so much about it and their understanding of it may be rather superficial, then this analogy is very effective in giving a clue to someone about what yoga aims to do. So let's talk about the musk deer. The musk deer is a deer found in the mountainous regions of Asia. They have them in the Himalayas, in the Himalaya mountains. And the musk deer is kind of like, it's like, it looks like a deer, but it's a little bit smaller than the deers that we have here in the West. It's got a little bit, I don't know, its back legs are a little different. It's a little bit like a kangarooish or something like that. It's something, it looks like a deer, but it's a little different. And it also has these little tusks, but what's the musk deer is most famous for, and hence the name, is that the aroma musk comes from a gland within the it's this furry gland that's within the kind of like the near the navel of the deer. And this aroma, there's a gland in there, and it's got some kind of powder in there, and that powder, it has this aroma that is so enchanting that it's one of the most expensive, things, elements, pound for pound, that on earth, this musk. It's said that I've heard that the yogis knew how to extract this musk from the deer without harming it. And now there are laws that you can't kill the deer because people are killing them, for this musk, and they would go extinct, quickly. But, when I can't imagine exactly how they would do it, but one thing that reminds me of it is once I was with Rogu at Super Soul Farm, and he was showing me how how they shear the sheep. Have you ever been there for that, Mara? No?
I haven't.
But they say that how you do it is you just kind of like, and they really need it like when the hot weather starts to come, because they got this big full thing of wool. But you kind of grab the sheep, like, in American football, you tackle, you kind of tackle the sheep, and then you kind of sit on your lap, and you kind of pull it up on your lap so that its legs are kind of out. And as soon as it's in that position, it just really becomes very calm, and it's just happy to just kind of lie there, and then you can just kind of start to shear away somehow. So maybe these yogis knew how to just hold that deer just right, so that it become very calm and peaceful, and somehow they could get that musk out. And still, I don't understand how they would do that. But this is the point, is that this aroma, I'm assuming, I'm no expert in wildlife and musk deers, but I assume in mating season is when the male begins to emanate this aroma. And the crazy thing is, and the instructive thing is, that when the deer smells this aroma, the deer itself becomes captivated by its own aroma, but it doesn't know where it's coming from. The deer is smelling that aroma and saying, that's the most incredible thing I've ever smelled in my life. Where is it coming from? I guess human beings, our sense of smell is relatively like weak in comparison with, like, say, like dogs, and so much of the wildlife, which really depends on the nose. So when the musk deer is smelling this aroma, it's running and running and chasing and trying to find it. First it's searching, can't find it. Everywhere it goes, it still smells it, but it can't find the source. It's looking everywhere. Where's it coming from? And then it starts to run, searching for it. It's chasing it. It's running aimlessly through the forest. And it's said, and that this is not just like just used for the, but like it's real, that this really happens. And the ancient yogis would see this because they're up there in the Himalayas, is that they would see the deer run and run and run aimlessly in the forest, searching for that aroma to the point of exhaustion and collapse, not realizing all along that the aroma was coming from within its own self. And so the yogis say this, and I mentioned earlier, they were in touch with nature and they're living out in the forest and they were seeing clues. Nature is just bringing clues, putting them right in front of our face to help us understand ourselves. So the yogis were seeing this as a clue. We're like these deer. What are we searching for? We're searching for happiness. We're running through the forest, right? And we all have our different forests. Like for me, forest is Manhattan, right? I look around Manhattan, people are running through this forest. They're running into the bars, they're running into the offices, they're running into the stores, they're running in and out of apartments, they're running here and there, searching for happiness. Trying to find an external source, assuming that happiness is coming from something outside myself, chasing it. Where is it? To the point of exhaustion and collapse. And, raise your hand if at any point you felt some exhaustion, maybe even collapse, in our search for happiness. Not realizing all along this secret of yoga, right? This deep, important secret of yoga, that happiness is actually our true nature. Happiness is something within us. We can find some kind of thrills. We can find some kind of temporary satisfactions or temporary pleasures externally, for sure. But the wise person is seeing that every time I find some pleasure, the nature of this world is that if it's a coin and it says pleasure on one side, always you can flip that coin over, and on the other side of the coin, there's pain, there's suffering, there's loss, right? So when you get the material pleasure, it comes automatically with the flip side. And so the wise yogis were seeing this, right? We're living like these deer. We're running and searching. Sometimes people are finding something, it's true. But they're not finding that Atma Suprasidhiti. They're not finding that deep, lasting, meaningful happiness, which is our own true nature, and which can't be found through any external source, but can only be found through the practice of yoga. And I want to be clear that that's not a sectarian statement. The point is, if you find it, you're practicing yoga. We can expand our understanding of what it means to practice yoga. If you're uncovering the nature of self, then you're practicing yoga, right? Whatever that path may look like. So, if we were to go out on the street in whatever, we have people from all around the world here. But wherever we live, if we were to step, even in India at this point, if we were to step out on the street in any major city, let's say, and stop the first person that we see and say, could you please define the word yoga for me? It is most likely that they would say something that has to do with asana, right? It's mostly, they might say it's stretching, or, it's doing these different postures. It's good for the health, or, some people might attach it to meditation. It's kind of like a spiritual meditative practice that people do, but even that would be rare. Most people define yoga, understand yoga in relation to the body and into asana, and that's okay. Nothing wrong with that. But there's so much more to it, because yoga is primarily designed to address the mind. The value of what yoga does with or for the body ultimately plays out in relation to the mind. So in other words, yoga asanas or postures can improve the health of the body and the systems of the body, the nervous system, the respiratory system, the circulatory system, the muscular system, the endocrine system, all of these systems. Asana is such a brilliantly designed form of physical movement that it can massage the inner organs in such a way that it can and maybe we'll talk about this in a bit more detail when we discuss Ashtanga yoga. But when it helps restore and maintain the smooth flow of all of the different bodily systems, and when they're functioning well, then the mind tends to become more clear and more lucid and easier to control and easier to focus. And all of these effects on the mind are very conducive for the practice of yoga. But let me share with you now an idea of, or let's say a definition of yoga. This is a definition I've shared with many of you in the past, but I'm going to share it again. It's a definition that throughout the series of talks that I'm going to give, this definition we will keep coming back to. And it's also a definition I find that, like, if you commit it to memory and keep it with you, it will always be helpful in whatever studies you're doing, And so here is the definition of yoga. Yoga is a practice which empowers one to overcome the obstacle of the mind for the purpose of the self experiencing its own true nature. And I'll say that again. Yoga is a practice which empowers one to overcome the obstacle of the mind for the purpose of the self experiencing its own true nature. For those of you that have studied Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, it may sound somewhat familiar. It's not so different from Patanjali's second and third sutras from the Yoga Sutras. Yogas Chittavritti Nirodha and Tada Drastus Varupe Vasthanam. Yoga is the stilling of the fluctuations in the mind. Then the seer abides in their own true nature. Right? So in both of these definitions, they're quite similar definitions. One is saying that yoga is a practice which empowers one to overcome the obstacle of the mind for the purpose of the self experiencing its own true nature. Patanjali's was saying yoga is the stilling of the fluctuations of the mind, more specific, then the result being that the seer abides in their own true nature. Now, the difference here is basically the same concept. The mind needs to be dealt with. And then the self, Patanjali refers to the self as the seer, can experience its own true nature. So the distinction between Patanjali's definition and the one that I'm providing is that Patanjali has narrowed down his method, stilling the mind, right, to just one of the four common yoga paths, and that's Ashtanga yoga. What all the four paths of yoga share in common is that they are all practices which empower one to overcome the obstacle of the mind for the purpose of the self experiencing its own true nature. But what distinguishes one from the other is that each one has a different way of dealing with the mind. Now, I'm going to repeat this because this is another thing where if you really grasp this simple point, it becomes a construct, or that you can use to always understand yoga more deeply. And we're going to go deeper into the distinctions. But again, all these four paths, these traditional paths, and people can speak of the broader yoga tradition in so many ways and divide it in so many ways. But many great teachers of yoga through the ages have divided into these four paths. And even within the Bhagavad Gita, you'll find in the 13th chapter, it speaks of yoga in these four paths, as these four paths. But I'll say it again, that each of these paths is yoga, and what they share in common is that they are all yoga. And how do we know that they're all yoga? Because they are all practices which empower one to overcome the obstacle of the mind for the purpose of the self experiencing its own true nature. Okay, great. What makes them different? And this is the key, is that each one of them has a different strategy, a different method for dealing with the mind. Each one of them has a different way of overcoming the obstacle of the mind. So when Patanjali says yoga is the stilling of the fluctuations of the mind, well, that's one way to deal with the obstacle of the mind. And that's the way that the mind is dealt with in the practice of, the particular practice of Ashtanga Yoga. Right? In Ashtanga Yoga, the aim is to still the mind through meditation, which is aided by rigorous discipline and concentration. Right? In Jnana Yoga, the idea is to break all the mind's attachments. Every attachment in the mind, I'm going to break it. Through like refining one's process of discernment. Discerning between what is real and what is illusion. What is real and what is illusion. And learning to apply that without any sentimentality, in a very stark way. And that practice is aided by practices of austerity and detachment. So Ashtanga Yoga is stilling the mind, holding it on one point. Jnana Yoga is breaking all the attachments in the mind. In Karma Yoga, the aim is to transform the ego, which is part of the mind, to transform the sense of ego that one has through embracing one's social responsibilities and serving with knowledge and detachment. All right. And then in Bhakti Yoga, the idea is to harmonize the mind. That the mind is it's been programmed through its experience. It's become very different from the nature of my very self. I want to transform the mind until it becomes very harmonious and parallel with the nature of myself. So each practice has a different way of dealing with the mind. But they're all yoga because they're all practices which empower one to overcome the obstacle of the mind for the purpose of the self experiencing its own true nature. Okay, I'm going to pause right here. We're about 45 minutes in or so. Maybe I'll take a break a little later too, that we can just stretch or something like that. But why don't I pause right here and see if there are any questions. Have any questions popped up on the board yet?
No, not yet.
Okay. Would anyone like to ask a question at this point? If so, please, you can use your little, what do they call that thing? Reaction?
Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay. Everyone good so far? Not too boring? Okay. Thank you for your encouragement. Vivi? Not boring at all. Okay, Vivi. Thank you. Okay. So now let me see where we're at. So we've defined yoga now. And that definition of yoga has three different features to it, three different subjects that are there. One was that there's the practice. Two was there's the obstacle of the mind. And three, there was the nature of the self, right? Yoga is a practice which empowers one to overcome the obstacle of the mind for the purpose of the self experiencing its own true nature. These are the three topics within that definition. So now what we're going to do, and we won't complete this until we're done with the next segment, which will take place either tomorrow or next weekend. But we're going to look at each one of those three topics. We're going to begin by we're going to go backwards. We're going to begin by talking about the nature of the self. We want to really understand the nature of the self. Okay? Then we're going to go and look at the mind and the nature of the mind. And finally, we're going to look at the practices or the four paths of yoga. Okay? So we begin, even before we start talking about these four paths, we begin by talking about the nature of the self, which is what yoga is meant to uncover, which is what yoga is meant to reveal. So when we speak of the nature of the self, we can understand that to live in wisdom, if we want to be wise, truly wise people, to live in wisdom means or begins with the understanding that we're not our body and we're not even our mind. We are an individual spark of spiritual energy, the Atma. In English we can say the soul or the self. And this idea is, or was, you could say, encapsulated in the ancient text, the Upanishads, through the aphorism Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, or I am spirit, right? I am not a physical entity. I may be entrapped within a physical body, and I may be engaging with this world through the very subtle physical structure called the mind. But I'm neither of those. I'm a spark of spiritual energy. And what does that mean? That's what we want to look into right now. So there's a Sanskrit phrase, sat-chit-ananda. Sat-chit-ananda. This is a phrase that is commonly used to describe the nature of God or the nature of the self, because they're composed of the same energy. That you'll find that phrase also in the Upanishads. It describes the self of consisting of three inherent qualities. Inherent, meaning it's not something that you gain from an outside source, but it is what you are, right? All of us, every living being. Sat means eternal or everlasting. Chit refers to awareness. Chit is very interesting. We'll spend a little time with it. It refers to awareness, but it also refers to like understanding or knowledge. Okay, and both of those concepts are important, awareness as well as knowledge or understanding. So eternality and awareness and knowledge, sat, chit, and then finally ananda. And ananda means perfect, deep happiness, or generally the word used is something deeper than the kind of, because when we say happiness, we think of the kind of happiness that we generally have in this world, but the word bliss is commonly used. Right, some kind of very deep, sublime sense of happiness. So we can say that fundamentally the nature of the self, our nature, is that we are eternal, we are full of knowledge, and we are full of bliss. Sat, Chit, Ananda. Okay? The first two qualities, eternality and knowledge, they can be contemplated by contrasting spiritual energy of the soul, the self, with material energy, all that surrounds us, right? If we want to understand our eternality as well as our knowledge or awareness, then we can look at contrasting these two fundamental energies. And so that becomes real important. The first two qualities, eternality and knowledge, let's dig into them. We'll do them one at a time, but to look into both of these, we have to look at the interaction of these two energies. The totality of all experience in this world can be understood as the interaction of two categories of energy. All right, this is fundamental now. So this is something else we can kind of draw a circle around and focus on and remember. So I'll say it again. The totality of all experience in this world, everything that we experience in life, can be understood as the interaction of two categories of energy. There's only two. You can take one of them and break it down. You can take both of these and break them down into more and more. But fundamentally, they're two energies. One is, in Sanskrit, one is called purusha, and the other is called prakriti. All right? So, although these terms are used in a variety of ways, we can begin to understand them like this. Purusha means spiritual energy, and prakriti refers to material energy. Spiritual energy, material energy. Or purusha means person, and prakriti means things, or the energy that things are made out of. Okay? So there are two fundamental differences between spiritual energy, again called purusha, and material energy called prakriti. And if you get this, and you can hold on to this, and you note this down. By the way, I have some images to share with everyone, and maybe I'll do it a little bit later in talk, and we can also share them. But I have some charts and stuff like that are going to highlight each one of these points. So we'll share that with you in a bit. But let's look at, again, so I'm going to share something right now that when you understand this, you have a big clue, according to the great sages of ancient India and the great yogis and the great self-realized masters and If you get this, you take leaps and bounds. It's something that, might take us many, many, many lifetimes to understand. And if you get it right now, wow, you just made a huge step forward. And that is, let's look at the difference between material energy and spiritual energy. Once you got this, you've got a big, big key, moving forward. Okay, so what's the difference? Two differences. First one has to do with eternality versus temporality. Would that be a word, Mary? Is that okay? Temporality? Is that a word? Yeah. Okay.
I think so.
Eternality versus temporality. And the second difference has to do with, would cognition be the right word? One is cognizant and the other is, what would be the opposite of cognizant? The lack of perception, like inanimate, inanimate maybe, but insentient, right? Insentient, would that be it? Sentient and insentient, right? Okay. So I'll use other language to explain these though. The first one, eternality versus temporality. It is said that purusha, or spiritual energy, is eternal, whereas material energy, or more specifically, the forms that material energy takes, are temporary. All right. So when we look at something, if we see that something is in one form today and tomorrow or next year or 100 years or 1,000 years from now is different, has that the elements that formed it came together and then at a certain point they separated and took on new shapes, that's material energy, right? Our bodies, for instance, right? We were all born in an infant's body, right? And over the years, we've seen that the cells that body was made out of have all died off, and we're in a new body now, right? And it's changing and changing and changing. At a certain point, it just completely disintegrates, and the water that's in my body now will enter some other body of water and take on a new shape, right? And the earthy elements that are in my body, it'll enter back into the earth, and who knows what it'll become. It could become a tree, or it could become something else, and the gaseousness and the fire that's in my body, all the different elements that are in my body, they've come together in a certain shape, and it's just a matter of time. They separate and they take on a new shape. That's called material energy. But what the yogis are saying, what Krishna throughout, especially this is kind of, he gives us at the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, which is arguably, I would argue, the most important and influential yoga text. It begins with understanding this point. In response to Arjuna's distress at the forthcoming battle that he has to enter, Krishna reminds him that we all existed in the past and we will all continue to exist eternally, even though everything is shifting around us. So in text 212, Krishna says to Arjuna, never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. And then he goes on to say, that even as we have passed through many bodies in this life, I was in a child's body, I was in a boy's body, I was in a teenage body, I was in a 20-year-old body, now I'm in a 55-year-old body, right? Made up of different configuration of cells, all different cells, right? Like they say that all the cells, they change after, they live like 7 years. So 7 years down the road, you're in a different body. And 7 more, although it's changing at every moment, but by that point, you'd be in a completely different body. So even though we're passing through many bodies in this life, we continue. We perceive. I remember what it was like to be in a boy's body, and I remember what it was like to be in a teenage body, and I remember what it was like to be in a 30-year-old body, and I remember that because I haven't changed. I've been the observer of my body, which is always changing, and not only my body, but my possessions and my homes and the bodies of those that I love, right? So Krishna says, as the embodied soul continually passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death, and that a sober person is not bewildered by such a change. And then he also mentions to Arjuna, right in the same section of verses, that wise people can clearly distinguish between what is temporary or material and, in a sense, illusory, and what is permanent and therefore real. So he says, those who are seers of the truth have concluded that of the non-existent, there's no endurance, right? If something changes, if something's here one day and gone the next, in a sense, it's unreal, right? And he says, and of the eternal, there is no change, right? So he says, this they have concluded by studying the nature of both. And he goes on to say that that the soul, being composed of spiritual energy, cannot be changed by the forces that govern material energy, right? So he says, for their soul, there's neither birth nor death at any time. The soul has not come into being, does not come into being, and will not come into being. The soul is unborn, eternal, everlasting, and primeval. The soul is not slain when the body is slain. And he says, as a person puts on new garments, giving up the old ones, the soul similarly accepts new material bodies, giving up the old and useless ones. The soul can never be cut to pieces by any weapon, nor burned by fire, nor moistened by water, nor withered by the wind. This individual soul is unbreakable and insoluble and can be neither burned nor dried. The soul is everlasting, present everywhere, unchangeable, immovable, and eternally the same. It is said that the soul is invisible, inconceivable, and immutable. Knowing this, you should not grieve for the body, right? So these verses has served as a source of inspiration since the time they were spoken so many centuries ago up to this present day. They act like like a strong breeze of reality that just disperses the clouds of illusion, right? That we tend to live in, like all the time. And they remind us, of our own eternal nature. So for the practice of yoga to lead to uncovering the soul's true nature, the yogi, through their study and their observation, must develop a firm grasp of the difference between what is temporary and what is eternal. That's what jnana is all about, really. What is temporary, what is eternal, what is real, what is unreal. Step by step, as yogis, we have to lose interest in the temporary and choose the eternal. When I say lose interest, I mean we have to lose interest in the idea that I can extract my happiness, through exploiting the material energy. We have to lose interest in that idea. And we have to embrace the idea that true happiness is found within, And in my own experience, I've seen modern day sages, of all walks of life, whose wisdom has been fortified by these verses, by these words. And they're able to face life's challenges, including great loss and even death, without any discouragement or any fear. These, again, by contemplating and reflecting on these texts, it can give us the strength to become a sage, to become a true yogi, right? And so it begins with understanding the difference between what's spirit and what's matter. And the first difference between the two is that spirit is eternal, matter is temporary. I am eternal. I observe the changing of my body. I even observe the different states of mind that are constantly changing. I observe them, right? And for a lot of people, the idea of embracing the idea that we're not the body is conceivable. But you really have to go deep to really get the idea that I'm not the mind. We tend to identify with the settings within the mind, the likes and the dislikes of the mind. We think that is me. When really that's just, and we'll get into this in greater depth, but really that is just temporary programming in a computer that has absolutely nothing to do with us and could be changed in a moment, right? And the yogi grasps all of this. So the first difference between matter and spirit is that matter is temporary, spirit is eternal. Now the second difference, and maybe we'll just discuss this and take a little break so that people can take a little breather and stretch out a bit. But the second difference has to do with, is this the subject of chit, or the awareness of the soul. And now, again, sometimes there's Sanskrit words that are hard to translate into English. So and I'm no Sanskrit expert, but I will do my best to try to explain this, is that the word chit, it encompasses the idea of awareness. In other words, a rock is apparently unaware, whereas an animal has awareness, right? One is sentient, one is insentient. So chit refers to that, one's own awareness. But it goes broader than that, and it also has to do with knowledge or understanding, and understanding things clearly or as they are, right? Truth, like that, accurate knowledge. So in the 17th verse of the second chapter of the Gita, Krishna says, that which pervades the entire body, you should know to be indestructible. He's speaking of the soul, but the idea is that the soul is just this tiny spark of spiritual energy. The Mundaka Upanishad, very ancient yogic text, speaks of the soul dwelling within it's in a poetic way, says within the cave of the heart, right? Within this area of the body, of the human body, that soul exists, right? But that little tiny invisible spark, sometimes just to give an idea of understanding how tiny the soul is, the Upanishads also speak of it as being 1/10,000th size, the tip of a hair. So, I mean, in one sense, that's like, I don't know where you cut the tip, but it means just like, I think it's just telling us that it's tiny, 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 like inconceivably tiny. But still the soul spreads its awareness, its chit potency throughout the entire body. And the way that the yogis describe this is that, and this is a bit mystical, and it's something that I can't explain with any kind of medical explanation. But if we're observant, we'll see that it makes a whole lot of sense. At least in my opinion, it makes a whole lot of sense. It says that when the blood circulates through the body and enters the region of the heart, it gathers energy from the Atma, from the soul. And it spreads that energy throughout the body wherever the blood flows in the form of awareness or in the form of consciousness. Therefore, our own Atma, my Atma, Mera's Atma, everyone's Atma here, we're all situated there within that region of the body, but we are aware of our entire body wherever the blood flows. So like if someone were to sneak up behind me right now and just kind of touch my little toe, I just start tickling my little toe, I would be aware of it. I would feel it, and I would say, what's going on down there? Someone's touching my toe. And if someone would come and touch the very tip of my head, my awareness is spread wherever the blood flows, from my tips of my toes to the tips of my fingers to the top of my head. Wherever the blood flows, I'm aware. I can experience. I can feel. But if you were to cut the flow of blood to one another, like in other words, if you take a tourniquet and wrap it around my ankle and tighten it and tighten it and tighten it more and more and more and more, so it was very tight, and you restricted the flow of blood to that area of my body, then a numbness would set in, that my awareness would become dulled. And it could become dulled to such a point where even you could take a pin and jab it deep into my toe, and I might not even feel it. And then once you let go of that tourniquet and allow the blood to flow to that area again, then the awareness again will spread. And again, if you stick a pin into my toe, it would cause me great pain. And we see where the blood doesn't flow, like in the hair or in the nails. We can clip those things, with a clipper or a pair of scissors. If we cut any other part of our body, it would be very tragic and painful. But if we snip the hair, we snip the toenails or whatever, we don't even feel it because there's no awareness, because there's no blood flow. So chit, part of what chit means is that awareness. And nothing, and to understand this aspect of it, we have to understand nothing more, right? Aware, conscious, sentient, experiencing, and especially we experience through the senses. We experience sight, we experience sound, taste, smell, and the tactile sense, right? Um, the soul is the one that experiences. Now, in this definition of yoga, where Patanjali, he says that then the seer abides in their own true nature, right? He's using the word seer, drastu. The word drista means to see. So drastu, one who sees the seer. He's using that to describe the soul because it's not the eyes that see, right? Because the eyes, in order to see, you need to be conscious, you need to be aware. And the eyes are neither conscious nor aware. The eyes are just a lens through which the Atma sees, through which the seer sees, right? The self, right? So we are all experiencing taste. We're all experiencing sight and sound and touch and smell. That's the Atma that's experiencing. And the body really experiences nothing at all. That makes sense? Everybody with me? Okay. And that consciousness, again, the Gita is saying that which pervades the entire body, you should know to be indestructible, right? The soul, pervading the body through its consciousness, through its awareness, through its chit potency. That my awareness spreads through my entire body. It doesn't spread 1 millimeter further, right? It's limited. My consciousness is limited to my body. And you might say, well, KAUSTUBHA, you could turn around and you could see like a book, on the bookshelf. So it hasn't your consciousness extended to the bookshelf. No. What's happened is the light has bounced off that book and then the light has extended to my eye. But my consciousness extends no further than my eye, right? And through that I can, what's the word I'm looking for? Like when you make a logical conclusion and you extend it to something, like I can, with me, Mara, come to my help.
Like hypothesize?
Okay, it wasn't the word I was looking for, but yeah, like I could hypothesize that, okay, a book must be 10 feet away. But I'm only perceiving it because the light, not the book, but the light bouncing off the book has come within the realm of my awareness, which is limited to my body. Okay. So material energy, or let's say spiritual energy, purusha, is conscious. It experiences. It has awareness. It tastes, it smells, it touches, it, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas material energy, or prakriti, has no such awareness. So these are the two differences between material and spiritual energy. I spent a little time on it, but I think it's, and if at the moment it sounds like I'm just going off on a random topic, let's try to bring it back. We're discussing the nature of the soul, and so we said that now that the nature of the soul is that it's sat, that it's eternal, that it never dies, right? We have always existed and we always will exist, right? And secondly, that it's aware, that it has awareness. And we're going to talk about the second part of chit in a moment, which has to do with knowledge. But before we do that, I want to share one more thought that I think is important for us to think about. And that is that when we discuss the nature of the soul, how the yogis see the soul, or where they see the soul, or what are the symptoms of the soul, where the yogis will say, oh, soul exists there. So it's said that there are 6 symptoms. To be honest, one of them is just so, I don't know, kind of arbitrary. I don't know exactly why they include this. I'm sure there's a very good reason. But sometimes I like to break it down to just 5. But I'll say all the 6. The yogis say wherever you see these 6 symptoms, that the soul is there. Okay? This is going to become real important. So if it sounds somewhat trivial, just bear with me, hang with me for a moment, and we'll get to what's important about it, at least in my opinion. They say wherever you see birth, growth, reproduction, this is the one that's a little, maintenance for some time, then dwindling or disease, and ultimately death. If you see these symptoms, that means the soul is present there. Birth, growth, reproduction, maintenance for some time, dwindling or disease, and death. When the yogis see those, they say, oh, these are the symptoms of the soul. Soul has existed here. Soul is existing here. Okay. Now, that becomes interesting and important because where do we see these symptoms? Obviously, we see them in humans, right? Humans are born, humans grow, humans reproduce, humans maintain for some time. And ultimately, humans become diseased or grow old and dwindle. And ultimately, we see the humans die. But who else goes through all of these changes, right? We see animals are born and grow and reproduce, et cetera, ultimately die. True. Interesting. Okay. Where else? Plants, right? We see plants are born, they grow, they reproduce, et cetera, and ultimately they die. Okay. So now, according to the yogis, if we accept what the yogis say, then we accept that not only do human beings have souls or are souls, but also animals have souls. Good to know, Ariana, right? And the cat you have there, it's got a soul. It's got its own, its own awareness, right? It's eternal. It's aware. So the cat has, the dog, right? Their souls, and not only even the plants, they're also go through the same. It means that there's the soul in the plant. Now, someone might say, okay, fair enough. I suppose it makes sense that there is some kind of spark of spiritual energy, not only within the human, but also within the animal. And okay, I'll give it to you, plants too. Yeah, there's obviously, it seemed logical to me that there's some spark of spirit in it that's making it grow and making it reproduce and so on. But it's not like us, right? But the yogis would say, no, think more deeply about this. They would say that the soul within the human is of the same quality of the soul within the animal and the soul within the plant, right? It has the soul in either of those forms, in any of those forms, has the same quality, the same potential, but that potential to express itself is either limited or facilitated, by the body that it's in at the time. I'll say that again, right? The quality of every soul, whether it be in a human, animal, in all the different species of animal, or plant in all the different varieties of plants, right? The quality of the soul is the same according to the yogis. But how it expresses its potential will be limited or expanded according to the body that it's in at the time. And, of course, the yogis are saying that that soul will travel through all these different forms, right? And that's called reincarnation. So the soul that is in the body of a human today may be in an animal tomorrow, and the next day may be, although that'd be, pretty rapid changing, but, and then later it could also be in the body of a plant. And the yogis would assume that we've been through so many different forms. Now, how can we better understand this? I use an analogy sometimes to help understand this. Let's say you were testing me, KAUSTUBHA, how fast are you? What's your potential for speed, right? And I was fortunate to that day that I had like a Porsche, right? Like I was borrowing someone's Porsche, so like this car can go like 200 miles an hour. And so you said, oh, you want to see speed? I'll show you what kind of speed I have potential for, and I just like open that thing up and, I zoom right by you. So you say, wow, KAUSTUBHA is really fast. And then they bring their friend the next day and they say, oh, this KAUSTUBHA, he's really fast. You got to see this guy. But the next day I didn't have that car. I had some old beat up, junky, rusted out car that only goes like 40 miles an hour. And so they said, KAUSTUBHA, show us your speed, And then I, took off in that thing and they're like, what? I thought you said KAUSTUBHA was fast. It looks like he's kind of slow. But it's not that I'm fast or slow. It was just the car that I was in at the moment was either limiting or expanding my potential for speed. Now the yogis say the ability to feel, sensitivity, intelligence, the ability to discriminate and think deeply, the ability, sensitivity in the sense of like the ability to experience emotion, subtle emotion, the ability to express emotion, to express knowledge, this will become expanded or reduced. Even, the depth of our awareness will be expanded or contracted according to the body that we're in. Right. So, for instance, like, we have many pet owners here. You take a dog, for instance, right? A dog, when it's happy, and it can express it to you. And it can also express to you when it's fearful, when it's afraid, or even its emotions, People tell me that own dogs, like, that when you break out the suitcase and start to pack the suitcase, the dog actually knows, like, oh man, the last time he did this, he was gone for a long time, And so the dog is like whimpering and say, no, like, I see the suitcase coming out. The dog has this intelligence, and it's expressing its emotion, through its whimpering and so on. And then when you walk back in the door, is the dog happy that you're back? Yeah, it lets you know. It very clearly can demonstrate to you that that is very happy that you're back. Whereas another animal, a cockroach, may not be able to do that or even feel that emotion. What to speak of a plant, where it's dulled all the more, right? Just like I can dull the awareness in my hand by tourniquet. Entering into these different forms is either going to be expand or contract that awareness, and how deep that awareness goes. This is just important to understand because it's part of the reason why it'll have to do with the awareness or the consciousness of the sage, the awareness of the yogi, because the yogi is going to have to cultivate a sense of kindness, right? A sensitivity. This is something that's been coming up, for those of you that are listening regularly to the podcast. When we speak of Vidura or Uddhava, they're often called Saumya or gentle, right? Because a gentle person, they're just like I might be more gentle with another human being than I might be with an animal, or what to speak of a plant, because I respect the soul there, I respect the life, I respect the awareness in that body. But the yogis are seeing the same soul that's in the human being as in the animal and in the plant. And therefore, I'm moving through life being as kind and gentle as I possibly can. And without that, if I become dull and insensitive, then my ability to really understand myself will become limited. And in the next form of life, I can take on a body that's more suited for that. As I've formed my consciousness, to become more dull, then I can take a body in the next life that's designed to match that lack of sensitivity, right? In the animal species or in the plant species, right? Now, this also has to do with why the yogis are vegetarian, right? Now, one might say, well, hold it. If there's an atma in the plant, well, then you're killing no matter what you eat. And the yogis will say, yes, that's a fact. Because one cannot exist, one cannot maintain their body without killing, and that's just nature. I mean, there's certain things like apple or something like that, a fruit, but even that, if you get microscopic and everything, there's death involved. But the idea is that the yogi is going to nourish their body in the most sensitive way that they can, right? And so that sensitivity means I can recognize that the awareness within the carrot in the ground is far more dull. It's far less sensitive than the awareness within a cow, say. So when I pull that carrot out of the ground, yes, indeed it is killing, but the awareness in that form is so limited that it's not a trauma or tragedy on the soul, like the same thing as it is like slitting the throat of a cow. And so, in any case, all of this, is still part of, we're still doing, I just wanted to share that to kind of fluff out a little bit something about the yogis' understanding of chit, of awareness, and how we have to move through the world with a certain sensitivity to the awareness of every living being. That's essential for the yogi. And what we're doing is we're looking at a definition of the word yoga. That yoga is a practice which empowers one to overcome the obstacle of the mind for the purpose of the self experiencing its own true nature. We're first looking at the true nature of the self, and we mentioned that we can understand the true nature of the self in this 3-word phrase, sat-chit-ananda. We looked at sat, which means eternal, and we've looked at chit, and we've gotten halfway through chit. We've looked at the awareness side of it. We haven't gotten to the knowledge side yet. All right, and then we'll look at ananda. And then we'll look a little bit deeper into the nature of the self too. But we're about an hour and 20 minutes in. What I suggest is maybe we take a 5-minute break. Would that be good for everyone? We could do 10, whatever you all think. With 5 or 10? Give me a 5 or give me a 10. Okay, I'm seeing 5s. So let's break for 5 minutes. We've got 2:21. So let's say at 2:26 sharp, we all come back. Sound okay? Good to be back. Do we lose people? Are they still? Everybody go away. They're coming back. Okay. So we ended speaking about we were talking about sat-chit-ananda as 3 features of the nature of the self. And we spoke about eternality, and then we started to speak about chit, and we spoke about how chit means awareness, and we spoke about awareness and how awareness spreads throughout our body, and how awareness is there in all different species. And even this idea, I find a very, I don't know what the word is exactly I'm looking for, but like liberating, well, let me put it this way. We spoke about how a yogi would see the same life, right? The same soul, a soul of the same quality as itself. Not only in other human beings. And if we can do that, we've come a long way, right? If we can have respect and sensitivity and appreciation for every human being, that's pretty good nowadays. But what to speak of if we could see that within every animal and even in every plant. And so this type of vision, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna calls it samadarshana, equal vision. Seeing life, this equal vision, which recognizes a spiritual unity in all life, regardless of the form or the circumstances. That's the beginning of the wisdom of the sage, right? That's where we begin to transform. That's where we begin to become different people, and the potential of yoga can really open up for us. It's the beginning of true knowledge, to see with that vision. Real important. Okay. And so speaking of knowledge, chit refers not, again, it's a Sanskrit word where you can't really find it in the English equivalent. It does convey the idea of awareness, but it also conveys the idea of knowledge. So if we wanted one way to translate the word chit, one way that Srila Prabhupada would commonly translate it as full of knowledge. A way that I also like to translate it is fixed in truth. Because here, chit or knowledge would mean the opposite of illusion or misperception or coming to a false conclusion. Right. So, let's look at the word jnana, and it can help us understanding a bit about chit. But, the word jnana is translated as knowledge. And the Bhagavad Gita is going to find what knowledge is. It'll say that knowledge means understanding 3 categories. So we've been talking about 2 categories, purusha and prakriti, spirit and matter. But if we take those 2, we can take one of them, we can take spirit and divide that into 2. Right? And so then you have the self and God. Both are made of the same spiritual energy. Right? So now you've got a subset, and now you've got 3 categories to talk about. Matter or prakriti, and then spirit meaning the self, and also God. Now when you understand these 3 topics, the jiva or the soul, the atma, the ishvara or God, and prakriti, material energy. When you understand these 3 topics and you understand how they relate to one another, then it's said that you have jnana, or true knowledge. And that's Krishna will say in the Gita, that is knowledge and nothing else is knowledge. When you get that, Right. And which reminds me of once someone challenged Srila Prabhupada, saying like, okay, you're the big guru and everything. Well, answer that you're supposed to know everything. Well, tell me this, how many windows are there in the Empire State Building? And Prabhupada gave the most fascinating answer, which I really appreciate. I think this answer, there's a level of depth to it that's really quite astounding. He said, the way that he answered that was, he said, how many drops of water in a mirage? And if you really think deeply about this answer, it's amazing. It's what he was, in a sense, what he was saying was, as a guru, what I'm meant to do is to represent this ancient tradition of knowledge. It doesn't mean I'm supposed to have every trivial, an answer to every trivial question. But it means that I'm supposed to represent and share genuine knowledge about the most essential topics of life. And so when you say, how many windows are in the Empire State Building, in a sense, I don't need to know that. I need to know, what is the Empire State Building composed of? What is its potential? How does it relate to me as an eternal spark of spiritual energy? And how does it relate to God? I don't need to know how many windows there are. In the same way that if I'm looking at a mirage, there's no point in knowing how many drops of water in it. It's a mirage. What I need to know is that it is a mirage and that it's not real water, right? So if I think that that's the mirage and you have real knowledge, you can say, that's not water. That's a mirage. Don't go running after it. Then you've helped me, right? And it's silly to ask how many drops of water in it, right? So chit is, something like that. It means that I got clarity. I can understand things as they are. And it's saying that is the nature of the soul. In our true condition, in our condition where we haven't been trapped and influenced by the material energy, we can see things as they are. And most essentially, really most fundamentally, what a yogi needs to understand, what any living being needs to understand to facilitate their spiritual development and freedom, is to get past the most fundamental illusion. The one fundamental illusion that opens up the door to all of the other illusions. and if we focus on this, I believe it'll help us all understand more deeply this idea of chit, or as translated as full of knowledge or fixed in truth. And that fundamental illusion is the idea, or the misperception, that I am this body. Right? We tend to the Atma, influenced by the material energy, by the prakriti, tends to become covered. We say covered, but let me try to think of another term. It becomes influenced, confused by the material energy, and tends to identify with the body, and even more subtly, tends to identify with the mind, right? And once we identify with the body, and we identify with the mind, then we make this fundamental miscalculation that will lead to another miscalculation, and another miscalculation, and the next miscalculation. If the soul within the body misidentifies itself with the body, both the distinct physical body and the subtle body or the mind, then the goal of satisfying the body and satisfying the mind will naturally rise to the forefront over all our pursuits. And so, with this illusion fixed in the mind as reality, we become just like that musk deer. We spend our days from the moment that we wake up into the moment that we lie down to go to sleep, searching for bodily pleasure and comforts, and trying to avoid anything that may interfere with our pleasures, or our physical pleasures or comforts. And we fail to focus on what is truly our own self-interest, because we have mistaken what is the self for what is not the self. We've mistaken truth and we bought into the illusion. So true knowledge will manifest in our thoughts. True chit, the nature of the self. When the nature of the self is arising, it manifests as what in Sanskrit they call vivek, clear discernment, being empowered to discriminate between what is real and what is unreal, what is truly valuable and what is like merely pleasant, let's say, or for that matter, unpleasant. So, and this isn't exactly learning, like vidya, the Sanskrit word for learning is vidya. This chit or this viveka, discrimination, you don't necessarily have to be like manifesting academic prowess. One doesn't need to be a scholar or a genius to really understand or deeply know what is what. Knowledge or, chit in this sense is better summarized as like a simple yet a very profound comprehension of reality. I understand who I am. I understand what this world is. I understand that there's a divine presence behind it all. I get what life is all about. I'm clear about this. There's no misconceptions in my head, in a sense in my head. We can call that chit. So the nature of the self is sat-chit-ananda. I'm eternal. My consciousness is spread throughout my body. I'm aware. I see. I smell. I taste. I touch. I'm sentient. But also I know who I am, what this world is, what God is, and how they all relate. Sat-chit. That's the nature of the self. That's who we really are underneath it all, but we may have lost touch with it. Okay? And then the third, ananda, which means bliss. Okay? And, within the ancient Vedic texts, there's the Vedanta Sutra speaks about the nature of the soul. It says, anandamaya bhyasat, that the absolute truth, God, you could say, by nature is pleasure-seeking, or is manifesting bliss. And there's so many verses like that. Satyam Brahma Ananda Rupam, that the spiritual energy or Brahman is composed of Satyam, truth, and Ananda, bliss. Or the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad says Vijnanam Anandam Brahma, that the supreme reality is divine knowledge and bliss. And the nature of the self is that it's part of that. And I should mention, I haven't mentioned up to this point, but I will mention, and this gets into the theological aspect of yoga. But when we say that the soul is sat-chit-ananda, the idea is that the soul is composed of the nature of God. And so therefore, because God is eternal, full of truth, and full of bliss, therefore each one of us, as well as every animal and every plant, the soul within all these forms shares that same nature. And the example is commonly given of the sun and the sunshine, right? If you look at the sun, the sun is the origin or the source of the sunshine. The sunshine is composed of the same energy of the sun, but one is the source and one is the effect of the source. But because the sun has certain qualities, its energy also has those qualities. So the nature of the sun is that it's bright, it has light, and it has heat. And so similarly, the nature of sunlight, which is far more limited than the sun, right? If a ray of sunlight enters into our room, it's pleasant and it's warm and it's bright, but it's so limited. Whereas the sun itself is practically, for the sake of the analogy, is practically unlimited. It's so vast, the power of the sun. But so although the ray of the sun is just a little piece of the energy of the sun, because it's made of the energy of the sun, it has the same qualities, heat and light. And so similarly, the idea is that the Atma, the soul, the self, its true nature is like that of God. It's eternal, fixed in truth, aware, and ultimately blissful. And because that supreme absolute truth is blissful, therefore each one of us is blissful, or ananda. And when we say this ananda, again, it's hard for us to conceive of this nature of this bliss, because in the illusion that we've been in for so long, there's so much suffering that we go through. But this ananda isn't like a rush of excitement that we get when we obtain an object that the mind has been attracted to. An observant person can like see, through their own life, and by observing the lives of others, that that even when our material desires for things like wealth and fame and honor and so on, when we finally achieve them, it becomes clear that they can't deliver ananda. They can't deliver deep, lasting happiness. And in fact, it's especially when those desires are achieved that one may feel like a really acute sense of depression. Because if I achieve these goals and I still feel empty, then what hope is there for any happiness in life, people may feel. So this simple fact, a simple fact of life, a fundamental simple fact of life, is that externals cannot satisfy the soul, cannot give it the ananda, which is its own true nature, which again, like the mustir, isn't found through anything. It has to be uncovered from within. So therefore, in the pages of Srimad Bhagavatam, one of my favorite verses, a verse that has the most important fundamental insight. If we want to be a sage as we move through this world, we can always remember this and keep this in mind. So important. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 8, Chapter 19, Text 21. All that exists within creation to satisfy one's senses cannot satisfy a person whose senses are uncontrolled, right? There's no amount of external anything, that can deliver this ananda, which is the nature of the soul. It's something that has to be found within. So therefore the sages, they embrace simplicity. I don't need all this external stuff. They limit their external needs. They focus inward to uncover that ananda, which is the true nature of the self. And one can focus inward when they are ready to let go of the search for possessions and position and sensual thrills. When they go inward, it becomes clear that true happiness isn't found in any of those ways. Not even through like peace, but ultimately, and this is where I'm going to go with this subject, ultimately is found through love. So what is the deep, and this is especially when we get to the Bhakti yogis now, because the Bhakti yogis have like a lot of literature on this idea about Ananda, about understanding that Ananda isn't just bliss. It's not the bliss of relief from material suffering. It's something far deeper than that. Because if we experience the bliss of relief of suffering, it can feel like bliss. And I'll give an example for this, right? And I've shared this with some of you in the past. But we all might have, as children, had someone like hold our head under the water, like when we're swimming. Someone grabs you by the back of the neck. They got you dunking, we call it, right? You dunk your head under that water. And when they're holding your head under that water, there within the mind, it is just pure anxiety, right? The mind is not thinking of anything else. The mind's not thinking of the food that it likes, or what it has to do tomorrow, or reminiscing on some time in the past that was enjoyable, or contemplating some difficult question. No. There's just 100% anxiety in the mind. And that anxiety is, when will it end? When will it end? When will it end? I need air. I need air. When will it end? It has to end. Please end soon. This suffering has to end. And then when they let you out and you can come back up and breathe, then you come out of the water and you take a breath. You fill your lungs with air. And in that moment, in that instant, all the anxiety is released in one instant. And that feeling of that relief of anxiety, that intense anxiety, and then the instant release from it can feel like bliss. Like, oh, this is so great. Finally, I got what I needed. I'm experiencing bliss. I can breathe. It's the best thing. Right? But we're all breathing right now. Right? Like we're all just like, we're breathing away, But it's just normal. It's like, for us, this isn't like bliss. It isn't some, great revelation of happiness to us. It's just like neutral, kind of thing. This is how we breathe. So there are yogis that conceive of the release from material suffering as ananda. But the bhakti yogis say, no. That, although it may feel like ananda, because who knows how many lifetimes and how many countless years we've been suffering in the material world, all types of anxiety, it can be misidentified as ananda, that release. They call it moksha or liberation. But there's something way beyond. That's just neutral. Right? That's just neutral. There's something way beyond that, way deeper, way more profound, way more blissful than that. And that is actually called divine love, right? Prema. So the yogis speak of prema or divine love as the true ananda of the soul. And so let's not misunderstand this word love, which is used commonly to refer to a wide range of feelings, even some of which are, quite the opposite of its true meaning, So nearly, I guess it was, I think nearly 500 years ago, about 500 years ago, let's just say, there was a great sage who lived on the bank of a holy lake called Radhakund. And his name was Krishnadas Kaviraj. Deeply inspiring figure. And he shared a notion about love and happiness, ananda, to help us understand the deeper meaning of both, happiness and love. And, this quote is found in his book called the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and which is one of the most important texts on Bhakti Yoga. So this is how he defines love. He says, and just try to hear it out, and I'll explain it as we go. He's going to use the word the abode of love. And by that he means the heart of the person that feels love. And then he's going to speak about the object of love. And the object of love is the person that we feel love for, right? So if I love my wife, it means I'm the abode of love and she's the object of my love, like that. So he says, the happiness of the abode of love is in the happiness of the object of love. This is not a relationship of desire for personal gratification. Whenever there is unselfish love, that is its style. The reservoir of love derives pleasure when the object of love is pleased. Okay? So what it's saying is true love, again, here the word abode refers to the heart of one who feels the love. And object refers to the one that they love. So the idea is that when one is deeply connected with another through love, they feel happiness within. They feel like a deep happiness within when the one that they love is pleased. Right? So these verses are specifically describing the very highest and purest expression of divine love called prema. But we can observe this phenomenon even like in the love of this world. Like we see a mother naturally holds feelings of love for her infant child, say, in the abode of her heart. And when the child smiles and laughs, she feels a burst of loving sentiments in her own heart as she's so emotionally connected to the child. And if for any reason, if the child is suffering some sort of discomfort or pain, it'll be nearly impossible for the mother to enjoy herself separately. Only when the child's suffering, has ceased, will the mother feel a sense of relief herself. And in fact, the enjoyment or suffering of the child is generally not only reflected in the heart of the mother, but it's even magnified in the heart of the mother. So when the child feels joy, the mother feels even greater joy, greater sense of pleasure than the child. And when the child feels pain, well, then the mother feels even greater sense of pain than the child. So there's a profound truth about life to be found in this idea about love. It's such a clear and simple but commonly misunderstood idea. There's a basic misconception that lies at the center of our struggles for happiness, and that is that we think we'll find happiness when others are serving us. But true happiness is found only through serving others. And we are by nature connected with other souls, and the happiness in our own heart is uncovered in response to the pleasure in the heart of the one that we love. And it's through that that one finds the deepest ananda, the deepest bliss. And so, this idea, and this is something that we've mentioned on the podcast before, but it's recognized in the biblical text where the Apostle Paul is writing his farewell to, I forget what community of people it was, but he shared this famous proclamation, and that is that it is more blessed to give than to receive. Right? It is more blessed to serve than to be served. Or if we translate his statement even more literally, it means that the one who gives is more blessed with happiness, with bliss, with ananda, than the one who receives. So happiness isn't an acquisition. Ananda isn't something that we gain, again, externally, but it's an inner revelation. And if we're not feeling happiness, it's because we're looking for it everywhere except where it is, like the deer again. And so we're blessed with happiness, when we're giving and when we're serving. And because of the external action of serving another, it's in harmony with the joy or the love that is our eternal inner nature of ananda. So service or selflessness it's not like a form of self-denial, it's self-fulfillment. And through service we cultivate, what's inside, manifesting it externally, right? But this bliss of love or ananda is what the Bhakti yogis say is ultimately the true nature of the self. And we only got about 7 minutes left, but maybe I'll stop here. There's a real big part. I want to go deeper into this idea about ananda, and with that we'll complete the nature of the self, and we'll be ready for the next topic, which is the mind, which we'll get into tomorrow. But I want to discuss the term dharma, because that's just, dharma means, in one sense, it means the essence or the nature of the self. And so again, we define it as sat-chit-ananda, but to go deeper, especially to understand what ananda is, I want to go deeper into this word dharma and discuss the idea of divine love being the very nature of the self. But I'll stop right now and see if we do have any questions. Amira, you got any there?
Yeah, we had a couple questions earlier about absolute truth. Hannah asked if you could please define absolute truth, and Sarah Elisa asked she would like to know how and where the idea of the absolute truth comes from in the differentiation of all 4 yoga paths.
Okay, let me deal with the first part, and then I'm going to ask you to speak to that second part. Now, I once asked the very same question of a person I know that's really brilliant philosopher, and had actually, he's a devotee, but way smarter than me, and also had a whole background in a whole Ivy League training in philosophy and theology and all that. So I said, well, what this term absolute truth, Prabhupada's using it all the time, exactly what does it mean? And to be honest, I really should know it better than this. But, simply, absolute means under all circumstances, right? There are truths that are relative truths, and there are truths that are absolute truths, right? So like a relative truth is, it could be anything, like anything temporary, like it's cold outside. Okay, well, it's cold outside now, but it won't be cold later. That's not an absolute truth. It's a relative truth. So an absolute truth has to be something that never changes, right? And so we could say, for instance, like, let's say my nature is sat-chit-ananda. In one sense, that is absolutely true. It may be covered, but it's always true, right? I'm eternal. That's always true. Absolute truth would mean something that no matter what the externals are, it remains the same. But this term absolute truth has been, and this is the part where I wish I remembered it in greater detail. Maybe I can do a little research and come back with a more in-depth answer. But that the absolute truth is a term that's been used to refer to God. That God is the truth, the very source of all that is. That undeniable and unshakable truth that always exists, that no matter what is changing around us, that being is truth and is the absolute truth. And so God becomes referred to as the absolute truth. That's about the most I can say about it right now with that, but I would like to look into that and maybe share some more about the origin of that term and how it's applied theologically. And then the second part was about the distinctions between the four paths of yoga.
Yeah, exactly. Where the absolute truth comes in the 4 different paths of yoga.
Well, in one sense, each one of those paths is it's meant to be a path to the absolute truth, right? The idea of being that my mind has bought into the illusion of temporary things that are not absolute, as being the source of happiness. And I recognize that this is something tomorrow we're going to talk about the mind in depth. We're going to talk about how the mind becomes programmed with ideas that are false, right? That aren't the truth. But we pursue these ideas as if they are the truth. Now, yoga is the idea like, okay, my mind's been corrupted, with all kind of files. Have been downloaded into the computer of my mind that have me running in the wrong direction. I need to gain control of my mind. I need to, whatever analogy you want to use, but I need to, rid my mind of these corrupt files so that I'm beginning to perceive things correctly again. I'm beginning to perceive truth again, real truth. That means I'll realize I'm not my body. I'll realize I'm not my mind. I'll become aware of what I'm not aware of right now, that I am sat-chit-ananda. So all these 4 paths are meant to be moving in the direction of unveiling absolute truth. Hope that's all right.
I think that's all the questions, unless anybody wants to raise their hand.
We got a couple of minutes if anyone wants to raise their reaction hand. If not, we can come together again tomorrow at 1 o'clock, 1 to 3 again. We'll pick up where we left off. Mara has these charts that I didn't even share today, but are really helpful. And Mara, what do you think is the best way to get that? Were you able to share it on the, not here?
No, I wasn't able to share it. I guess I'll post them on Patreon if you're a Patreon member, or if you're not a Patreon member, you could email us at wisdomofthesages108@gmail.com.
And just ask for the charts.
Yeah.
Okay. But everyone should get them because they'll be real helpful for you. And I'll probably start to show them a little bit tomorrow. And maybe when we do the recap, I'll show them. But make sure you get those. Either if you're a Patreon member, you'll find them there for download. And if not, write to wisdomofthesages108@gmail.com. Ask for the charts. Again, if you would like to give a donation for this class, you could go to PayPal and into the account Bhakti Collective at gmail.com and leave something there. Somehow I really love to do this in person and have more interaction, but somehow, I don't know, I'm feeling it. I'm feeling great. I love seeing your faces, and I feel enlivened being in your association somehow, even though it is a bizarre, technical kind of connection that we have going on here. There's something real and genuine about it, and I feel very happy being with you all. So thank you all so much. It means a lot to me that so many of you tuned in. I think we had probably over 90 people or something like that, 100 people maybe, something like that, when you count everybody, all the pairs, and include the cats and so on. But it's been great being with you. I look forward to being with you tomorrow. I got a feeling this is going to take at least 6 to 8 classes to go through all of this stuff. So, next few weekends, let's focus on it. All right. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. It's been a great joy. And I'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you, KAUSTUBHA.
Thank you, everyone.